Hi everyone, this is Mike. Welcome to the channel. At the moment I'm working on a course on UFOs that I'm going to publish on Udemy. And in this video I'm going to give you a sample of one of the lectures on Foo Fighters. One of my main interests in UFOs is actually trying to figure out what is behind them. I suspect that we have a force here that can manifest as whatever it wants to manifest as. And I think it actually does that in different regions of the world. So in the US we currently have this force manifesting as UFOs. In Brazil it sometimes manifests in other ways, and there is an example where a UFO manifested as something that looked like a flying icebox, and it chased a hunter round and round and shone a blinding light at him, which actually burned him and permanently damaged his eyes. And I'll look at that one in a later video when I look at a series of attacks by UFOs on hunters in Brazil, in a case where the hunters became the hunted. And with the Foo Fighters in World War II, they were definitely a forerunner of UFOs, which appeared just a few years later. But they appear to have been modelled on floating lights in marshes that used to follow people in earlier times. These were known as will-o'-the-wisps or jack-o'-lanterns, and versions of them appeared in many different countries. And these are still seen in certain areas even today. So with that being said, I'll play the lecture now, and then I'll come back on and I'll give you a really interesting commentary on it at the end. Like I said, this will be part of a forthcoming course I'm creating for Udemy, so if you're watching this in the future, check below for a link to the course, as I'll come back and add that link when the course is ready. Okay, let's move into the lecture now. Hi everyone, welcome to this lecture. What I'm going to look at here are the Foo Fighters from World War II, and I'm going to contrast them with the situation we have now with UFOs. And just to give you a bit of background, Foo Fighters were coloured balls of light that were highly maneuverable, and that followed planes at high speed during the night in World War II. They were very similar in some ways to the will-o'-the-wisps or jack-o'-lanterns that used to be seen floating over Martians in the 17th and 18th centuries. And these lights, which were balls of light, had followed people on multiple occasions in earlier times. And what we have to think about here is if we are living on a planet that is partly composed of dark matter with multiple dimensions, then lobbing bombs around in the middle of the night in World War II is likely to have had an effect on other dimensions besides our own. And that's going to have consequences if that's the case. And what we may have done there in World War II is suddenly woken up a force that was quietly minding its own business and not really paying too much attention to our world. And the term Foo Fighter was first coined by a pilot in the 415th Airborne Division, and the term was based on a comedy show from the 1930s. And I'm going to give you a bit of background here. In December 1944, the 415th Night Fighter Squadron was based at a place called Oki Air Base in the town of Nancy in France, which is about 100 miles east of Strasbourg, and Strasbourg is on the border with Germany. And the 415th weren't the first people to see Foo Fighters. Coloured balls of light had already been seen by members of the British Royal Air Force as early as March 1942. So we're talking a couple of years later. So they had been seen during the war, but not very frequently until the Allies invaded France. And just to give you a bit of a feeling for what was going on for the 415th, I'm going to give you a few entries from their logs in December. So, on December the 15th, 1944, here's a log saying, "I saw a brilliant red light at 2,000 feet going east at 200 miles an hour in the vicinity of Erstein." Erstein is a little town near Strasbourg. And he said he followed it by sight until it went out. And although the pilot followed the light, he was unable to catch it. So as he followed it, it would just accelerate and get away. And this was the standard practice. They never really caught any of the lights. Now, 3 days later, on December the 18th, in the area around Rastatt, which was basically way the other side of Nancy, so that was west of Nancy, pilots sighted 5 or 6 red and green lights flying in a T-shape, which followed them through turns and then closed to 1,000 feet. The lights followed them for several miles and then disappeared. And then on December the 23rd, 5 days after that, the pilots saw 2 lights coming towards them from the ground. After reaching the altitude of the flight, the light chose one plane and then followed it closely at the tail for 2 minutes. And on the same night, another group from the 415th saw 2 orange lights. One of those orange lights was sighted at 10,000 feet and the other one climbed fast until it disappeared. The next day, on December the 24th, one pilot observed a glowing red object shooting straight up in the air. And 4 days later, after Christmas, on December the 28th, one patrol saw 2 sets of red and white lights. One set appeared on the port side and the other on the starboard side, and then rapidly closed in on the planes. The night lights were seen 4 or 5 times during the flight period, so these things were pretty much around every night, which must have been quite concerning for them. And the pilots tried shooting at the lights, but to no avail. They always avoided whatever was fired at them in the same way that UFOs do today. Obviously, they tried to chase them, they tried to fire at them, but it just basically didn't work. And they got a bit paranoid, thinking the Germans had it, but meantime the Germans were having the same problem, and so were the Japanese. And they assumed it was a secret weapon of the Brits or the Americans. And as the war went on, the American command became paranoid and clamped down on reports. And pilots who reported them as time went on were firstly accused of having vertigo and imagining it, and then some of them were sent for psychiatric evaluation. So already at the end of World War II, we've got fear in the commander structure, and we've got a head in the sand habit of denial, which is no good for anybody. We have that now. It had obviously started then, and things like sending pilots for psychiatric evaluations just because they see coloured lights is absolutely stupid, but that's basically what they did. So basically what they did was shut down the reporting. So then they didn't know what was happening, even if the pilots did. And I'll get back to this in other lectures, because this sort of behaviour is still going on now by the commanders. And what that means is the pilots and the navigators know what's going on, and the radar operators, but the top command doesn't have a clue because the reports never get up to them. And, that's a kind of disaster in the making. And although the normal reason given for the whole UFO or coloured lights things in this case is that the general public might panic, I think there's another real reason behind it. And I think the reason they push these denials and then persecution on the people who report it has more to do with the fact that the powers in charge can't stand the thought that they're totally helpless against UFOs or rapidly moving lights or whatever happens to be current at the time. And although we have UFOs now, we're going to have something else in another 50 or 100 years. And basically what we had here were balls of light that could easily follow planes doing 250 to 300 miles an hour. So in the past, we'd seen balls of light in marshes just floating. And now we're seeing an adaptation of that, where balls of light were able to fly at 250 or 300 miles an hour. They were able to follow flights in formation. They were able to maneuver left and right of them. So just generally a kind of bit of a problem for the pilots in theory. And what we basically had there was groups of planes being surrounded on both sides by ball-coloured lights that flew with them. And then we also had one plane just in that brief navigation list that I gave you, where the light followed in on its tail and followed it closely. And that in itself would have been very threatening to a pilot, because if you have another aircraft on your tail like that in a war situation, then you're probably going to get shot down. So just the actual fact that there was something on the plane's tail following it would have made the pilot nervous, or certainly would have made him report it as a potential problem. And if we look at this situation of Foo Fighters, they were really behaving in much the same way that UFOs behave with planes today. I'm going to show you a situation later on where a UFO actually flew between 2 American airplanes that were both worth $750 million each, which is really, at the end of the day, the main thing the commanders are thinking of. They obviously mentioned the pilots as well, but losing a plane that costs that much just because a UFO flew into it basically would cause them a problem. And again, that causes fear in the command structure. And the planes couldn't catch the lights then. and they were just as capable of shooting away at high speed as they are now, and they couldn't be shot down. So to sum up, what I've done here is just use this this analogy with Foo Fighters just to say that something changed during World War II. We obviously came to the attention of whatever force is causing UFOs now. And maybe it takes them a little bit of time to adapt to whatever we're doing, because what we saw in World War II was not really craft that were flying about, but we saw coloured lights flying about. And if there is a similarity between whatever produced the fairies and whatever is producing UFOs and the coloured lights, they can basically manifest as anything they want to manifest as. So I think very likely the Foo Fighters just basically morphed into UFOs, and we were seeing UFOs pretty soon after World War II. Because it didn't stop with the end of World War II. America started carrying on doing nuclear tests, which obviously would be a massive devastation or disturbance to an area compared with just throwing bombs around. So we really did have a potential situation, whereas if there is a parallel dark matter part of Earth, we were certainly sending plenty of signals and making plenty of noise from our end. Okay, with that being said, I'll shut this lecture down because I don't want it to be too long, and I'll see you in the next lecture. Okay, I hope you enjoyed the lecture. As you'll see from the example given, Foo Fighters behaved in very similar ways to the way that UFOs behave now. Foo Fighters were faster and more maneuverable than World War II fighters, but only just faster, which meant they were deliberately flying slower than they really could. Literally a few years after World War II, Foo Fighters were remodeled as flying saucers. And in one incident in 2004 that the US Navy has now stated was real, a pilot was flying his jet at 3,400 miles per hour, and the UFO that was playing with him was flying at 13,000 miles per hour and making sharp right and left-hand turns at right angles which would shake one of our planes apart. And this begs the question, was the UFO real, or was an entity somewhere else in another dimension just watching the Navy pilot manoeuvre on a screen, and then making a movement on the screen, on his screen, with the equivalent of a cursor, and having that manifest as a UFO in our dimension? Certainly the force on a real object making a sharp right-hand turn at 13,000 miles an hour would be considerable. And I'll cover some of those questions in other lectures in the Udemy course I'm working on, but I just wanted to leave you with that thought. And look out for other videos on this topic, and check down below to see if the course is out yet, because if you're watching this at some time in the future, it may well have been published. When I do publish the course, I'll make the first 2 lectures and some of the others available for free. And for now, thank you for watching. I'll talk to you again soon, but I did just want to say please subscribe, because that way you won't miss any future videos that I'm going to put out on this, because there'll be more to come soon. Okay, so with that being said, thanks very much for listening, and I hope you have a great day and a great evening. Thank you.